Our greatest journey is not conquering the sea, the mountains, or space. It has become fully alive, to have faced adversity and mowed it down, to have stood still in the face of our monsters and watch as they vanish into the ether. And it's this journey within every single one of us that calls on that hero. Heroes like Dave Lappin. Hailing from Ireland but grinding from his home in Malta, Dave Lappin's been a professional poker player for 14 years, and his continued longevity and success in the live and the online realms attracted the attention of Unibet, for whom he's acted as a brand ambassador for the past 4 years. He's also a creative little genius, and Mr. Lapin co-hosts the Chip Race podcast, which won a Global Poker Index award. We co-hosted that with his partner Darryl Kearney, and they've also created a second show called The Lock-In, so check that one out as well. In this episode of The Hero's Journey, we talk about Lapin's experience in the film and TV industry. We talk about the devastating and harrowing impact that continued miscarriages can have in a relationship, and much, much more. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, I'll shut the hell up and leave you in the capable hands of Mr. Dave Lappin.
Dave Lappin, look what I'm drinking.
Well, as I just mentioned hilariously off camera a moment ago, you're either drinking some sexy tea or that's your own piss.
And as I said a few minutes ago, my piss hasn't been like that for over 10 years. Don't you just hate it when you're getting ready for a podcast and then you just start up and you're like, "So Dave, how's it going?" And then you just say all this great stuff. And then you go, "Right, we're going on air, right? Ready?" And then it's like, "So Dave, how's it going?" And you have to say the same thing again. Oh, you frozen? Oh my God, no, Dave's frozen. We got to go.
No, I was just trying to annoy you there.
Why is your cup so small?
I've just got massive hands, Lee.
Oh, I nearly spit tea all over myself. Let me ask you a question. How much does it really annoy you when you go to a cafe? Italy normally sticks out in my mind. You pay €10 for a coffee or a tea. No, let's say tea. €10 for a cup of tea. And then you get it in a little china, like the Queen would be drinking out of it, cup. And you have one mouthful and it's gone. And you have to ask them to come over to put more hot water in. And they look at you as if you've just slapped your cock on the table or something. Like, does that bother you as well, or is it just me?
Well, I don't think I've ever ordered a €10 pot of tea in Italy.
No, not a pot, a cup.
I like fancy things, though. I like when it's like the little cups and stuff. I like little fancy stuff. I'm all about the little touches, to be honest.
But when I grew up, we had a mug, like it was a big mug, you know? Maybe I'm the mug.
That is a very fast. So you're drinking out of jam jars. So posh where you are in California.
California love. Well, Dave, you got to do it. So we're on the hero's journey. So I'm going to go right back to the beginning. In what ways did your parents leave you a little bit fucked up?
That's a lovely way of putting it. I suppose they all do their best, don't they? Kind of. No, they do. I think. How did they fuck me up? Well, I suppose they weren't together for a start. I'm not going to really blame them for that. They probably shouldn't have been, but you do get off to a little bit of a false start, I think, as a person from a broken home. I think there is something, particularly I was born in Dublin in 1981. And actually, even though it's much more common these days, of course, for people to be born out of wedlock, and, my own son was too, but also to just have parents who aren't together. It wasn't then, actually. In Ireland, I was the only kid in school who was not from a normal nuclear family. So I suppose that did sort of make it a little bit different. I know teachers used to fetishize it a bit and be all like, "Are you okay?" About everything. I think they, you normalize your own life. So I didn't really think anything of it. But from their point of view, I think they just sort of assumed that I must be affected in some bigger way than I think I probably was. But then, obviously you do look back on it. I think it's a big thing in my head now with my son. I would be devastated if myself and Sharon broke up, and obviously for myself selfishly, but for him as well. I really wouldn't want that for him either. So it is a huge motivator to not be an asshole.
It's a paradox as well, isn't it? Because being through the process myself, there's a part of it when you're going through that process of understanding that your relationship's fallen apart, and you kind of say to yourself, well, I need to do this for my son at the time, for me. But at the same time, you kind of want to do it for your son to keep them together. But then there's this selfish part of you that's like, well, am I willing to be in this relationship for the next 20, 30 years for my son? And is this healthy for him? It's such a paradox, such a difficult thing to entertain.
Yeah, it's an impossible decision, I think. And obviously, it's much better to leave a bad relationship for the kids' sake as well. It's awful to be, and I know plenty of people whose parents didn't break up but probably should have. So that's another whole, awful toxic environment to grow up in. So I don't have any animosity or blame towards them for that. But I think it's still sort of in a really sort of sad way. I recognize how it came out in my writing years later, that there was some sort of daemon at the back of my mind that was still trying to put my parents back together again. Like sort of, a really naive, childish wish fulfillment was sort of taking place, but it was coming out in characters and it was coming out in stories I was writing. But it was still there, and it was something I assumed wasn't there because I assumed I was fine. So obviously it still was trying to find its way to the surface.
So who did you end up living with, your mum or your dad, and how do you think it shaped you, missing that other aspect, either the feminine or the masculine?
Both completely equally.
Wow. That doesn't happen that often.
No, and I was made part of the decision making. So they sort of lived together despite not really being together for at least a few years. And then my mum moved out of that house into her own house. And then I was kind of made part of the decision, which was like, how do you want to do this? Weekend dad, school holiday, kind of split it up that way. And in the end, I had this kind of idea as a kid. I was you can imagine how precocious I must have been to speak this way. But I was like, I want to be like with dad Monday, Wednesday, Saturday, mum Tuesday, Thursday, Sunday, and my granny on Friday. That way, pretty much every day of the week, I saw them either in the morning or in the evening. Yeah. So for me, it felt normal. I saw both parents every day. And that, like in retrospect, that was an awful way to do it from their point of view, just in terms of the logistics. But they went with that, and that's the way it was my entire life. My entire sort of up till I was 16 and didn't really live with my parents anymore. That was exactly how it was those days.
It's good that they gave you the option, and they didn't use you as a weapon of mass destruction, which I know certainly happened in my relationship. It's really complicated.
Yeah, well, that is terrible. I'm sorry to hear that for you, because that isn't pleasant at all. Obviously, the kids should never be pawns in that game, or there shouldn't be power plays using that. So yeah, no, I was very lucky. And look, my parents were not a good suit for each other, but they're both great people, and they are very civil, and they're, probably not close, but they always sort of would get together when need be for me and have the right conversations and think of my needs. So, no, I don't think they messed me up in any way, to be honest. Relatively, in some
yeah. We all have that abandonment energy in us for some reason, but yeah, nothing that stands out. What was it like growing up in Dublin in the early 80s then?
It was very different to anyone who's been to Ireland in the last 20 years, for sure. Ireland was sort of coming out of, I wouldn't even call it a recession, because it was basically a poor country. It was basically like a third world country for a long time, not by name, but effectively for people. There was a lot of poverty, and the 80s would have been sort of the slow emergence from that, but still quite poor. So I knew poverty for sure. Like, we didn't have much money growing up, but then it was a very slow crawl to the 90s, and the 90s just began a boom. I guess in the sort of 60s, 70s, there was a huge investment. What money Ireland did have, they put into education, and they sort of began to see the dividends of that. Obviously part of the European project as well. All those kind of things certainly changed Ireland. Ireland became European and cosmopolitan, and sort of a modern city in Dublin, for example. And to a lesser extent all around the country. So I think it's very different to what people would know now. But you went on that journey with it, and then the boom sort of went from 1990 to 2006 or whatever. It just didn't really stop. Ireland was always getting a bit more affluent. Obviously had its crash in 06, 07, and sort of recovered quite well relatively again. When you consider how deep that recession was for a while.
And how was the school playground, the arena, the Coliseum? What was it like growing up? And kind of like think back to kind of like primary school, secondary school. What was the old playground like?
Yeah, it was. I liked school. I was good in school. I was like clever, so I did well in most subjects. So it certainly wasn't a place I didn't want to go. When you talk about the playground, like I kicked ball with everyone else on lunch breaks and whatnot. I probably tried to get involved in extracurricular things if they were going on, maybe some art stuff or some, when there was a school play, I wanted to be involved, that kind of thing too. But no, reasonably happy. I remember I definitely loved kicking the ball around because I remember I used to get up early and go into school myself early so that I could play football in the yard for 45 minutes before school started. So I was obviously mustard keen. That weared off, actually. As I got towards my teens, I took the lie-in. But
you had the lie-in.
Yeah, but when I was 8 or 9, I was keen to get in.
Was you an only child, or did you have brothers and sisters?
Kind of both, in a way. I was an only child to my parents, and then my dad married. My parents never married, so my dad married for the first time a wonderful woman called Kate, and they had 4 kids who are absolutely my siblings. I don't think of them any less than full siblings. And but it did create that age difference. So my sister Ruth was, I was 10 when she was born, and my brother John, who's the youngest, I was 16 and a half, 17 when he was born. So it's a very much a different brood, if you like. Like I got to be an only child for a long time, and then I got to have loads of young siblings. It's
really interesting interviewing poker players. Like it shows how different the world is from where I grew up. Where I grew up, like if you said like with some pride then, oh, see, that's quite smart in school. Yeah, that's quite smart. Like where I grew up, it was like, I'm smart and I don't want anyone to know I'm smart, because if they know I'm smart, they're going to kick my fucking head in, right? Like that's how it was where I grew up. But when I talk to poker players from all over the world, obviously, there's none of that. Like what happened in your school was there, and this is similar with my son Jude, like he's like 19 now. But when I talk about what his schooling was like, it's very different. There was no kind of bullying or anything. Was there any of that around? Did you dodge it? Was you a part of it? What was happening there on that score?
Like you heard rumors that there was like a kid getting bullied once in a blue moon, maybe in a different class or something. There wasn't too much, to be fair. Maybe 90 people in the year in the school I was in, 3 classes. So we were roughly divided into groups of 25 for everything. And I guess like there must have been a couple of kids who'd kind of say something stupid, and you'd have the usual like jeering from the back of the class, people making noises or whatever. But I wouldn't have called it bullying per se. It was just the rough and tumble of being in school. I certainly wouldn't say I was ever subjected to bullying, and I hope nobody thinks I ever bullied them. Ian Simpson might say I bully him now, but that's probably that's a different kettle of fish.
So no bullying or anything. So what was your actual biggest challenge in childhood then? What was your there's always a villain in our story, and we have different villains depending on what parts of our journey we're on. What in childhood, what was your villain?
I'm not sure there was an overt villain. I guess I was competitive. I always wanted to do well in school, and that sort of got interesting when I became a teenager. I guess maybe it was more of an internal villain. Maybe I was the villain in my own sort of situation, because I remember a point where I kind of realized what I wanted to do in college. And this was when I was about 14, so well away from college still, was I wanted to do an arts degree. I wanted to do more general learning, because I still really valued classics and philosophy and psychology and these types of things. And I thought, well, that's what I'd really be interested in. And actually the points required as per the educational system in Ireland to get into those things was not very competitive. If you wanted to do law or medicine, you had to sort of get straight A's. But if you wanted to do arts, which I did, you could probably get straight C's, and I could have got B's blindfolded, and I probably could have got mostly A's if I had to, burst a gut to do that. So I was probably just focused on doing well in the subjects I loved. So I loved English, and I loved history, and I loved art. So my languages kind of fell by the wayside, because I sort of decided I didn't care too much about them. I didn't study any science subjects, which, they just wasn't really how I was wired. I was wired for English and literature, and these kind of things were much more interesting to me. So I just geared it all towards sort of getting like 100% in like 3 subjects that I just wanted to be brilliant at, and then let everything else just kind of fall wherever the chips landed. And that was more than enough in the end to get the course I wanted. So at some level, my hyper competitive sort of nature up till the age of about 13 just fell completely away in my teenage years, and I became really happy to just have very narrow areas of interest that I would do well in, and not really be this kind of all-rounder in other subjects too. I also wanted to do better in sports. I became a cricketer when I was about 10, and I loved the game. I loved the strategy side of the game. I loved captaining the teams I played on, and that was even, I wanted to do that more. So they became much more interesting to me, to be honest.
Talk about your captaining as a cricketing, like, and leadership qualities. When did that start emerging, and who are your mentors that kind of like shaped that? Because it doesn't come. I think there's a leader in everybody, but it just doesn't come naturally for a lot of people, right?
Yeah, well, if you go to sort of mentors or role models, like I had a fantastic English teacher, sort of almost like my captain, sort of inspirational English teacher, great guy, John Doyle, and he really made me love my Shakespeare and my poetry and writing essays and all that kind of stuff. He was a really strict disciplinarian. He was very critical, but then when you did well and he praised you, it felt great. And I always kind of admired that type of mentoring. I think that's probably still what I respond best to at some level. And then my cricket coach was an amazing guy who was in the Irish Army. He was a corporal sergeant in the Irish Army. He actually led the Irish troops in the Lebanon. And he was a fantastic cricketer as well. So when he went into his retirement ages, and he was a real old dude, like his demonstrations were like this really like shaky old guy, but he was so good, and he got the message across, and he kind of drill sergeant us. It was all like wax on, wax off kind of stuff as well. And you just kind of, you worked on the basics really well, and everyone on the team was kind of like really united as a team. And I just thought he was a bit of a genius, and he was a great role model in that respect. So I always admired him. I actually wrote, I hope, what he would consider to be a lovely blog about him years ago. He is really old these days. He must be in his 90s now. But when he was, I suppose, in his 80s, maybe a decade ago, I wrote a nice kind of poker cricket crossover about him. Vinny Savino is his name. Fabulous guy. And he was hugely influential.
I always like to, when I look at the top poker players in the game, and I think to myself, what is it that they have, or what do I feel that is needed? I always see like a high level of IQ, which is seems to be important, but also a high level of EQ. So as you're growing up, and you're obviously intelligent, and you've got some good mentors around you, what about the EQ aspect of it? Like, how was you learning to communicate, to interact, to express your feelings and that kind of side of stuff?
Yeah, I think that's probably where I both struggled and maybe continue to struggle at some level. I think probably, unfortunately, I expressed myself through anger too much. I think I definitely had anger issues. My mother, who's a psychotherapist, would certainly agree, I think, on this one.
Oh, wow, that works out. How did that work out? Oh, no, we'll talk about that later. Carry on.
We can circle back to that. But no, I think I probably did still have some repressed sort of stuff going on, where I felt the need to express myself, but I didn't kind of have the emotional intelligence to do it in a more discerned way. So two things would happen. I would either blow a gasket and be very reactive and upset and angry. And it would being upset always came out as anger, which is also problematic. And then the second thing is I would do that almost Fraser Crane thing, is I would rationalize feelings. So I'd turn the feelings into ideas, and they're not ideas, they're feelings. Mm-hmm. They have to be felt, they can't be taught. So I think at some level, while there's still some kind of meta know thyself intelligence going on that I could process and understand what I was doing, I was still doing it. I still lacked the more fundamental components of how to express myself better. And then I think, unfortunately, as I tried to work my way out of anger, sulking behavior, or kind of a bit broody, kind of moody behavior, probably replaced it at some level. And that's not good either.
Does that still come up today?
My girlfriend would say absolutely yes. She would 100% say you are a sulker. You kind of get in the mood and you go into the other room. But then that's my fear of, I don't want to express anger. Because, you know, in your relationship, in your home life, your kids around, obviously not that people don't like say, oh, fuck off, or get angry once in a while. Of course they do. But, you know, you don't want that to be the response. And I still probably then kind of go, well, then I'll just be on my own in the other room. And then that's like, oh, look at you being a moody bastard, which is probably true. But then you're just constantly trying to figure out the best way to handle emotions. I think that's probably where I'm not strong and maybe never have been.
Right. I mean, it's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that, by the way. It's really interesting. Like, I just released a piece today, I think. Well, it's been released for a while, but I put it on Twitter today. Kuznetsov, Timothy Kuznetsov. And when I was interviewing him, talking to him, he was saying how, like, he just, I mean, this is like very polarized. He didn't actually say this, but it was almost like I had no emotions growing up as a kid. And then I'm playing poker and I haven't got no emotions and I'm doing really well. Like, I'm fucking smashing it. And then all of a sudden I start hanging around with people and I start liking them and I start having feelings. And then all of a sudden, like, I was like, what the fuck's going on? Like, my game started to change. I started to tilt, and he'll say, now that he's attuned with those feelings and he learns to manage them, he's a much more overall rounded human being, but definitely had a problem in that respect. What about you in terms of poker and tilt with the old anger and sulking? Does that show up?
Yeah, it absolutely does. But I think I've also, again, I understand how to manage it in a poker context. So, like, good friends of mine, Dara O'Carney would be sort of somebody who, certainly when he's playing online, would be unfazed by bad beats that are occurring. He'd just be on to the next decision. I don't think he even watches the runouts, to be honest. He probably doesn't even know what happened. That's the right decision, I'll do that. That's the right decision, I'll do that. That game disappeared. So he's like, well, the guy either had a better hand or I got bad beated, but he doesn't even know what happened. Which is actually a really healthy way of doing it if you think about it. Like, not like, obviously
no
we don't
attachment.
Want to, yeah, we don't.
It's almost like the Buddhism way of playing poker, right? Like, yeah. No attachment, like it.
No, it's really good. And then like Dara Davey, another very close poker friend of mine, would again just have this kind of neutrality where he would be, I don't want to call it robotic because we're not robots, but like just be very good at handling it. Can be very good at just moving on to the next decision. That's what happens. These things happen and go on. I'm different, but I don't think it affects my game negatively, is that I will just go, fuck!
Yeah.
Fucking bastard! And then gone. Like, I just let it out really fast.
Uh-huh.
And so, but then, like, I lived with Dara Davey, and poor Dara Davey's been all like zen, and I'm just like, fuck, fucking fuck. And I'm just like, dude, seriously, can you like stop this? Like, because eventually he's like, fuck off. I can't write in the same room anymore if you keep doing this. And I was like, okay, so I had to be a little bit more managed. I used to play in the living room, where it's obviously a communal space, and Sharon is like, get yourself into that fucking box room. That's where you're going to live with all the swearing at the computer. I'm not dealing with that shit. So I don't think it affects me because I can't even remember a time where I last went, oh, I'm so angry from the last hand, I'm all in, or just something stupid. I'm sure incrementally there could be little mistakes due to, emotional state. Cumulative bad beats and stuff could definitely, I'm not trying to say that I'm immune, but I genuinely feel like my method is to just like expleet and then it's gone.
This is what I love about poker. This is what I love about poker, Dave. It's like, it is literally a microcosm of life, right? So if your wife is really pissed off with you sulking, maybe you just need to go in the room, shut the door and go, fuck! And then open the door and come back in. Be like, I'm good. Let's play the next hand of life.
Yeah.
No sulking needed here.
Yeah.
But there's some truth in that, right? Like, it can teach us, oh, hang on, if I can handle this situation here, how can I apply that in life, right?
Yeah, I think, there are totally transferable kind of things that, either whether it's life things that can inform poker or back to front. Yeah. And I think, I think I probably am a little bit more steady or tactical, I want to say. Like, I think I've always been a sort of strategic person, if that makes sense. Like, I always kind of go, well, like, it's really valuable to just reflect and kind of like work out the problem, try and see the game tree of your life situation, or if you're on the cricket field or whatever the context is, and just kind of work it out. And there's a strength in that. And then that's obviously completely transferable to poker, but also it comes from poker that you might even become more that way, which is sometimes a bit dangerous, because then you sort of try to think everything through in life, and maybe you can't just always be tactical and, you know, working it all out. Maybe you have to just kind of let it hit you sometimes. And I think there's a disadvantage to being overly I don't know, maybe if you pick apart life in that kind of forensic detail, and you try to manipulate too much and sort of puppet master situations, I think you actually sort of lose a lot of the flavor of what makes life great. So I try not to do that too much,
particularly in like in relationships. So like your primary sleeping partner relationship, right? So if you are like me, like very kind of like logic and rational about, so you're in a conflict and you're just super rational about it, and you're dealing with someone whose language is feeling, like, you're fucked, right? Like you're just like they're just looking at you thinking, this guy just doesn't give a shit, you know? So there's a bit of play there for sure, something to learn.
Yeah, and I think actually that comes back, you were talking about my parents earlier. That was a classic example of two people who polarized themselves. My mother is a very feelings person. She was an actress, she's a theater director, and she became a psychotherapist. So she lives in a world of emotions. And my dad would be much more calculated and calm and rational, and he would have those qualities. And you know, the work he did, he was a producer, and he worked with a lot of creative people, but he tended to lean into the management side of things. So I think, again, what happens when you have couples who are like that is they actually drive each other to the outskirts of where they are. My mother became more emotional probably with him because she's not getting an emotional response maybe from him when one is appropriate. And he's seeing somebody overly emotional and can't cope with too much emotion coming at him, becomes even more rational. You retreat back to your sort of your pillar. And I think I could probably be guilty of that too. I could probably do what my dad did at some level on occasions. In other relationships, particularly over my life, not the one I'm in now, where I would have kind of become a bit too detached and a bit too emotionless. And yeah, no, I can totally relate to what you're saying there.
Yeah, same here. So you're in school, you're smashing a cricket bat around, but not at anyone's head. By the way, when I was younger, this kid called me a chink. I was about 8 or 9. It was one of the first times someone had called me a chink. And I called him a prick or something. And he went at me with a cricket bat. And actually, the only thing that I had to protect myself with was a compass. Do you remember those in school? So I'm like, fucking come on with a compass. Obviously, terrified that I don't want to, like, I can't, like, stab a kid with a compass. And he's swinging a cricket bat at me.
Yeah. Well, you don't have any reach. Like, if you can get in close, your only option is to, like, stab him.
But that was fighting back then, wasn't it? Like two kids trying to be hard that really don't want to get hurt. That just go, come on then. It's like Premier League football, right? The old handbags at 10p. Anyway, so I just wanted to put that cricket bat story in there. So while you're swinging your cricket bat,
I didn't mean for my cricket pass to be a trigger, Lee. I'm really sorry.
It is. I'm gonna end up drinking for the first time in 10 years. What is it that you fast forward a little bit to, like, teenager? So, you know, the time when we're thinking, no girl in the world is ever going to love me. I'm going to grow up and I'm not going to have any money and I'm not going to worth anything. I don't want to leave home because I'm too scared. Obviously, they're just all my thoughts and feelings. But what was it like? Because teenage years, it's really tough. What was you thinking about the future and becoming a man?
Can you be a bit more specific? Because I suppose I'm just trying to
just blurt that at you. Laura, let's break it down a little bit then. So what were your thoughts and feelings around a career? So you're at home, you got a roof over your head, you got Maslow's hierarchy of needs all kind of cushy. And then you're like, fuck, at some point I got to, like, leave this place. Like, what was you thinking about that? And where did you want to go? And what did you want to do?
I couldn't wait to get out of the house, to be honest. I was really independent already. I pretty much lived on my own in my dad's house in Rathgar in Dublin. He had actually moved the family down to Laois. It was a kind of a year and a half crossover where he had both houses before he sold the other kind of thing. And I sort of just lived on my own in that house for a decent chunk of time, to be honest. Like they'd be home at weekends or whatnot. But I was allowed to have an enormous amount of independence at a young age, probably from 15 onwards, maybe even probably about 15 onwards. And I couldn't wait. I was just like, I couldn't wait to move in with my friend and be in college and, you know, just not be under the roof. Not that it wasn't a bad roof and I had all this independence anyway, but I just was very, like, I wanted to get out and have my own life and go to college and work. And I actually took a year off between school and college to work because I was really keen. I was young when I finished school and I was like, there's no rush here. I'd love to do a year of like work on film sets. I ended up getting a restaurant job, which was brilliant, to be honest. But the idea was to kind of work on movies and kind of wet my whistle for maybe getting into that industry after college.
What was the ultimate goal of being in the movie industry? Like, did you want to be a director? Did you want to be a writer, producer? What was it you wanted to do?
Screenwriter was definitely, by that age, was what I would like to have done. I liked writing stories, but I guess I felt like this for the screen was probably what I could do best, and probably the medium I understood the best. Like I lived in a house of filmmakers, so I knew the business at some level, and I understood the process, and I got to be in the editing room with like quite big movies being made and things like that. Amazing opportunities for a kid to have. So I knew people in the industry too. So I suppose I just kind of felt like it was all gearing towards something that would be film. But again, I was in no particular rush. I was still like, I want to just do college and do arts and do philosophy or whatever those subjects would come up. I just wanted to do things that I'd find interesting.
It's time to remind you folks that if it wasn't for the support of Run It Once Poker, I wouldn't be able to learn all these complicated words from people like Dave Lappin. So it's time to give them a shout out. Rio Poker is an online poker room for players created by players, and if that appeals to you, then they have a wonderful little welcome bonus for you. You can go to once.run/hero play today and pick up a 100% welcome bonus up to a ceiling of €600. And there are two elements to this deposit bonus that make it amazing, okay? The first is it never expires as long as you play one hand every 30 days. And second, all of your deposits during this 30-day time scale count towards a bonus. So remember that URL, once.run/hero play.
How was money appearing in your life during that time period? Because, for me, from my own personal experiences, whenever I don't have to worry about money, life seems to be okay. I'm kind of thinking about the artist who he's doing art for intrinsic reasons and then how that suffers when they have to do it for extrinsic reasons. So I'm kind of like thinking, listening to you saying about how great life was and getting into the movie industry and all that. How did money ever impinge upon that or put any pressure on you in that score?
Short answer is probably no. I obviously did describe a sort of a fairly impoverished sort of early childhood where, you know, Ireland wasn't well off and we didn't have a lot. But my dad did become quite well off through my teen years. And as such, you know, I was well looked after and I had lots of nice things and life was fine through my teenage years. I never felt like we were under pressure. But I still remembered that early time. I still remembered what it was like, you know, particularly living with my mum, who was had kind of quit being an actress and was training to be a psychotherapist and didn't have much money. And we lived in a little cottage in a lovely area called Rialto in Dublin, but it wasn't a great area at the time. Like, it was a fairly poor area. And it was in my mind all the time that I don't want to be poor. I don't want to have these decisions to make, you know, like if you need more money for the heating, then you'd have to budget differently for food that month or whatever it was. And that was part and parcel of my very early childhood. So I think everything in my psyche has been a reaction to that. So I always wanted to have my own money. I always kind of saved what I could. When I left school, I immediately got a job and saved money while I was in that job. So I actually was somebody who had a bit of money from quite a young age, if that makes sense. And I was always, but it was out of this kind of pathological fear of not having it. And I still kind of like that, to be honest. Like, I don't have any aspirations to be filthy rich, but I have always kind of lived my life in a sort of a tactical, capitalist way. Despite not being a fan of capitalism, I can play that game well, and that was always important to me, just to never kind of feel like there was a wolf at the door.
And how far did the interest in the film industry go, and how did poker eventually come into your life?
The film sort of stuff happened quite quickly after college. So I ended up doing an MLit after I did a couple of masters. So this was like 7 or 8 years of college, 7.5 years, I think. And, I was very qualified. I could have got into academia kind of stuff, but it was qualified in things that weren't actually very useful unless you went into academia or found a way to sort of very specifically use philosophy, as it was in particular, that I had done. I'd done a year as a screenwriting master's for a year as well. So that was sort of what I was going to try and use. And I pitched an idea to a production company in Dublin for my own show, sort of not feeling like I had any chance of them getting that off the ground. And that production company went to the national broadcaster in Ireland, pitched a number of shows, and mine was the only one they picked to commission. So I was suddenly like the writer, I was the showrunner of my own TV show that was going to be made. And I was like, holy shit, like I must be brilliant at this, because I like literally wrote that on a fucking napkin 2 days ago.
It's like poker winning your first tournament, right?
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
Oh, fucking hell, I'm a pro poker player.
Yeah, no, not to say that the idea wasn't a bit more interesting and probably had some other stuff going on in it, but I did literally throw it together, and I was like, wow, okay, so like I'm probably going to end up having a good career in this. This will be good. Like if you get your first thing made, you're onto something, because most people are going to struggle to get that first break, if you like.
Can I ask you a question on that very quickly?
Yeah, go on.
So when this becomes a success, are you thinking, oh wow, I could this could lead somewhere, or are you thinking, fuck me, I'm going to win an Oscar?
Closer to the last one, I have to say, which probably makes me sound horrible, but just not that the Oscar or that kind of thing would have been important, but just like I'm going to have a career in this. I'm going to get to make shows. Like I'm getting to make my own show. I'm not even writing someone else's show. I'm writing my show. And I thought, well, that's really cool. And like, this is promising. Like this is going to be a really promising opportunity. And if this goes well, even if this goes kind of just okay, I'm still going to be a young person who got their own show made, and that's going to open other doors, and it's going to be a tremendous chance. But everything went to shit. About 9 months into the writing process, I was 4.5 episodes into a 6-episode series, which hadn't been filmed yet. It was we were just in the writing phase, working with script editors and the producer specifically, and they took it away. They basically said, yeah, we're not going to continue to develop this show. They had 3 shows on slate in RTE at the time. Perhaps the budgetary constraints of 2007, that was the year it was, where the shit hit the fan economically in Ireland, and all the budgets did get cut. They did scrap 2 of the 3 shows. They went down to make 1 of the 3 shows. It wasn't my one. I wasn't picked. And I was on the scrap heap, and they offered me, do you want to be a junior writer on the soap opera that they make? Which is like, for you, might be like being on Brookside or something. And for us, it was a show called Fair City. And I was like, oh my fucking God, no. Like I hate that show. It's embarrassing. And I thought I was going to have my own show and be the main writer. And now I'm going to be the junior writer on a fucking soap that I can't stand. And like in retrospect, it was probably another reasonable break. I could have taken that opportunity and done it well, as so much as you could do it well in those constraints, and then maybe become a senior writer and then maybe pitch my own show a year later, whatever you could do. But I was just like, fuck you, no, this is bullshit. I fucking wanted give me my thing back. I want the thing back that I had. And it was really humiliating. It was really, it was a real gut punch. And like, I guess in my head, I was already like, not quite imagining the Oscar, but I was imagining the career, and it was just taken off me. And what was offered to me then as a sort of a booby prize felt so shit. Probably wasn't that shit, but in retrospect, but it felt so shit that I was like, I don't want that. And I sort of burnt my bridge. And I was sort of around the same time, was becoming decent at poker, was making like beer money from poker. I was like, I'm going to fucking do poker. If I do poker, I get to be my own boss, and no one fucking tells me what to do, and no one decommissions me, and, I don't have to rely on other people. And that's what I did. And it was sort of like nobody agreed. Everyone around me was like, what the fuck is this decision, Dave? You're an idiot. But I was really like intent on not proving them wrong, because I didn't really care about it, but proving me right Like I can do this on my own then. I can study poker, get good at poker, be good at something that I'm my own boss. And that was really important. You can see the anger's coming out again. See, I'm proving my own point here. It was all
and the sulkiness. But I mean, like, the reason I asked you the question about the Oscars, just to tie this up in a nice little bow, I guess, is that, you know, most of us have heard that if you want to reduce your suffering, then reduce your expectations. But one of the things I find interviewing poker players throughout the breadth, it doesn't matter what stakes you're at, if you're doing it as a profession, there is this Oscar mentality, right? So in one aspect, I think about it and I think, okay, having this, I'm going to make it no matter fucking what, and I'm going to fucking do this big time, right? There's something about it that I find in every poker player. It doesn't matter if you end up super high roller stakes, but if you end up as a professional poker player, at some point, that kind of inside you has got you there. And I find that very interesting because in other forms of life, it makes me wonder how much suffering poker players go through because of this high expectation and the way that the game fucking hits you, you know? Like, but before we get there, just to reflect back on what you said, I know we had a few laughs there. That must have been a harrowing, emotional fucking kick in the balls of a period of your life.
Yeah, it absolutely was. Like, looking back, obviously, and it's always easier to look back at some level, but you know, I didn't deserve the opportunity in the first place. So what got taken off me, I was running well to have gotten at the beginning. So if I could have seen the wood from the trees, I probably wouldn't have been as reactionary. But because I had probably led myself to believe, okay, this is great, I'm going to be the creator and showrunner on my own show, which might end up having like 3 seasons or something, and that's going to be like my calling card and to a career where I maybe do make movies, maybe I go to Hollywood and all that kind of stuff. And again, I suppose, like, this seems really weird, but you know, I have been to the Oscars. My dad has produced movies that have been Oscar nominated, several movies in fact. And so that standard or that sort of level was not something that seemed unbridgeable. If that, I know that's kind of fucking crazy and really egotistical at some level, but when you're close to it, like when you know Oscar nominees and you know people who do great work and deservedly got recognized, again, particular trophies aside, like that doesn't really matter. But when they reach that level in their craft, that proximity to that is very alluring, and you start thinking to yourself, I can achieve at that level. So it just come back to what you said about the poker players, where obviously we are kind of all shooting for the stars at some level too.
I don't think what you just said there is egotistical either. I think the flip side of that is the belief that we can't achieve stuff, and we make gods out of people who get to the Oscars, which I think is far more damaging than us believing that we can get there. I think, you know, we all need to realize that, you know, depending on our upbringing, our environment and stuff, it's going to be difficult. But dude, I lived in Ogmore Vale, 8,000 people in a little valley. And there's a mate of mine called Mags, right, whose wife had postnatal depression. He ended up looking after her and his son, completely fell apart and realized that he had postnatal depression, started writing about it, and became the only person in the world who was talking about men having postnatal depression, and ended up seeing a fucking Queen. And now he travels all the way around the world with a big gathering of men going, yeah, we have postnatal depression as well. And he came from Ogmore Vale with 8,000 people. So like, you can do like, don't like shoot for the little stars, shoot for the big fuckers, right? And I think if anyone's going to get any value out of these things, like these are some of the points that I really want to accentuate, I guess, is like, be a bit balanced about it, but shoot.
But you know what's important there is in the example, lovely example of the person you know from your village or your town, is he didn't do that with an eye on the outcomes. Well, not those outcomes, like not the fame.
He didn't.
Not the, you know.
He was a cable salesman. Yeah.
Yeah.
He did
it because it was a thing in itself that was worthy. He did it because he was like, this is something I'm authentically feeling and I want to express it and I want to put it down in words, and maybe other people will find those words and relate to them. So his motivation was very pure. Now, he's had success and he's had fame maybe off the back of that. And that does seem like he's shot for the stars at some level and got it. But actually, he wasn't shooting for any particular stars. He was just trying to have integrity in what he was doing as a craft, or as a sort of a way of explaining how he was feeling. And that in itself is sort of more important. Which
is different to your background, right? So I'm always interested in this. So I'll ask you this, actually. So your dad's like a producer who's like, you know, got to the level of the Oscars. Your mum's an actress. And then you end up getting involved in that kind of stuff, right? Like I have, my brother-in-law is an artist and a teacher, and his wife is a teacher. And their eldest son is now in art college. But here's the other thing: they're both Christians and deep Christians, and their kids. And well, the eldest is now like changing his mind a little bit, but the kids are Christians, right? So where do you land on the kind of like, okay, we have our children, we want them to be autonomous and make their own decisions, but also knowing at the same time that pretty much what we do, they're going to latch onto it in some degree. Like where do you land on that kind of thought process?
So to kind of break down your question, is that sort of like how much influence do you want to have versus how much freedom you give them?
Yeah. How much do you think that your voyage into the film industry was like pure kind of intrinsic, kind of like motivated by your love of it and movies and stuff? And how much was it like, oh, this is what my mum and dad do. I'm talking very subconscious here, but this is what my mum and dad do. So I guess I ought to do this equally or better. Like, do you think you had a choice?
Yeah, no, I totally think I had a choice. I just loved it, to be honest. I just love movies. I still do. I'd still love to work in movies. I think that it's a wonderful art form. It's a collaboration of lots of art forms, and it's culturally significant still. Maybe television is overtaking it, actually, ironically, these days as a culturally important thing. But again, those skill sets transfer. You know, a feature film screenwriter is going to be a TV screenwriter if they just decide to write a TV show. So I think that those skills can be transferred. No, I didn't feel like any pressure at all. In fact, actually, my dad would have put no particular effort into helping me follow in his footsteps. He was like the most anti-nepotistic person I've ever come across, almost to the point of pathology. He would have not encouraged me to have any leg up because of who he was. Right. He'd have almost made it more difficult, if that makes sense. Yeah. Not because he wanted me to suffer or that he didn't think what he did was good, that was worth following in, but just because I think it was like anathema to him for anyone to perceive him as having given his son an unfair advantage. So like in the example of the production company I went to and trying to get that show off the ground, he was not involved.
Right.
So it was, it was me on my own steam on that. And he would have been quite critical. Like I remember sending him early drafts of the script I was writing, and he didn't like that show. And then to be honest, I don't like that show much now. So I read it back, he's probably right. But he wasn't, he had a way to be kind of negative and critical that wasn't nurturing. Now, I don't want to be hard on him for that, because I think he has lots of other kind of nurturing skills and other ways in which he's a great parent. But that hurt sometimes, where I didn't feel like he was really like, I didn't feel like he had my back quite like my mum might have had my back when it came to creative endeavors.
How does that affect you today when you're dealing with feedback? Because, you know, in the world that you're in, you're getting a lot of it, I imagine. So how do the two tie in? Have you changed? Are you very wary of seeing kind of like dad energy on Twitter and dad energy in like blog posts? Like, does it affect you in any way?
I think it's probably water off a duck's back for the most part. I think I probably made a decision a long, long time ago that I really did care tremendously about how people I loved thought of me. And I didn't care at all about people who I didn't have much time for. They could think whatever they want of me and it would never bother me. It matters to me that the people I respect think I'm an okay dude. It doesn't matter at all what someone I don't know thinks. So look, like the obvious example now these days is like the chip race or the lock-in or these kind of shows that I make within the poker space. And, I have to say it's very nice that actually most of it is positive, but people say negative stuff all the time. Some of it's critically negative, and they're right. Particularly in the early days, Dara O'Kearney's wife, Mireille, used to give us a scathing review of every episode in the early days. And 75% of her criticism was spot on, and she usually hit the nail on the head and was very blunt about it, and that helped us improve in the early days, where actually you need to improve quite quickly in the early days, because if you don't start getting positive feedback soon enough, it's very discouraging and you probably give up. So and we have, again, I think anybody in my circle would always feel comfortable enough to criticize anything I do, even though maybe I don't come across like that to people who don't know me that well. I think I do receive criticism pretty well, and I think and I do respond to it too, because again, if that person is someone who I rate, even if I don't agree with them, I'm interested by why that person would disagree, and maybe that person represents lots of other people who disagree. So I'm always thinking about those things. And, in the end of the day, the Chip Race as a show is never going to appeal to everybody in every segment. The whole idea of is that it's a variety show. So, when you do one kind of piece, you're going to switch off one little 10% of your audience, but you do it anyway because you want to have material there that everybody can enjoy.
When you got into poker after the show kind of fell apart, where's the inciting incident in this? So, like, when are the people looking at your life thinking, is he going to make it? Like, this is what the story's all about. It's like Dave's going to be a professional poker player. When was that moment, do you think?
Well, I suppose that to phrase the question that way, it more feels like other people were going to bestow upon me when I made it at some level, which was never, again, how my brain would process that. So for me, it was about proving that I could live on the money I made from poker for a year. And I did that.
Right.
Yeah, I was
was there a monetary goal? Like, did you, like, I remember mine was, I left the railway, it was like $45,000. If I can make $45,000 in year one, I'm going to like give it a shot. Like, did you have something like that?
I just wanted to have the same amount of money in my bank account at the end of the year. I just wanted to go, I can live off the money I make from poker. And I did. It was a lean year. I remember it well. It was a lean year, playing a lot of sit and goes, trying to keep the variance low on a small bankroll, while also learning the game and improving, finding my feet at some level. But the second year, then I gave it a go for a second year, obviously, once the first year gone well. And that was a lot better. And I actually built up a bit of a bankroll in that second year. And then in the third year, I got very lucky. Had one very big live result for about 100K. And then suddenly that was a bankroll that I could play bigger. And there was a buffer there. I could tolerate swings that I couldn't previously. And I suppose maybe to the outside, maybe to friends and family, that was a key moment, because David had won this big live tournament. That was like, or I chopped it. That was this like big sort of prestigious event. I suppose at the time it was one of the full tilt events back in the day, the España series. For me, it didn't really matter. It was a weird one. I had already made my mind up 6 months before that I was good enough to do that, and that something like that would probably not happen that soon, but would happen at some point. And then it did happen sooner, and I was already kind of psychologically adjusted. I think there was key moments earlier than that, maybe like within the first year, where it was almost like interventions, like family and friends were almost like, we need to talk about Dave. And I could imagine them having those meetings behind my back and then meeting me in a coffee shop and deciding we have to talk to them, because I had begun this very nocturnal life. Because I was all in for poker at that point. I was kind of like, I was like, fuck everything else. I can't control anything else. So I'm going to make sure that this works. And at the time, if you remember, obviously everything was US based. Yeah. So I was working from 10 p.m. Ireland time till 6 a.m. every day, which meant you don't really go to bed immediately after you play those sessions because you're a bit buzzing. So you watch an hour of TV, you're going to bed at 7 or 8 a.m. So you're waking up at 3 p.m. and your friends are all like, what the fuck is wrong with you? You don't even see light, some seasons of the year with that. So I think they were right, by the way. I don't judge them negatively. It wasn't like, oh, they didn't back me and they didn't think I'd make it and haha, I was right. I actually think they were being really good friends, because it was a kind of a ropey enough decision on balance. And they were only looking out for my best interests.
It's good that you have them around. It's good that you have people like that around you, actually. That's unusual. It's unusual,
Yeah, I'm superbly lucky with friends in particular. I think I've just made friends at different points in my life and held on to all of them pretty much. And they know me for a long time, and they do feel like they could intervene in a spot where, you know, it might be necessary. So, look, I never hold any ill will towards them. The fact that they doubted I could be a poker player, and they were just trying to, you know, give good advice.
So it sounds like the inciting incident would be if we're filming, it's almost like this transition from like the pain and the suffering and the humiliation and rejection of the film industry, and then you like, right, like I'm gonna beat this, and it's like literally we're filming you. You're going to libraries, you're picking up Doyle Brunson's Super System. You're trying, you're failing, you're trying, you're failing.
You're describing it filmically like it's a montage in a movie, but that's actually exactly what happened. That's right. That would be an accurate montage, you know, carved out from moments in my life over the following few months. I've no doubt. Writing down in a restaurant on a napkin, okay, I can beat $24.45 mans by 18%. If I play 40 of them every day, I can make this much. I can build it. It was like that. It was like you could make it filmically look like that.
I love it. Was you in a relationship then in that? Because it seems like a really critical juncture in your life, like going all in on poker. Was you in a relationship? And if so, how did poker impinge on that?
Not at the very, very start, but in the second year, I actually met somebody through poker. I met who became my girlfriend, Michelle, playing a $5 sit and go on Full Tilt. And just got talking in the chat box like you do. That kind of became, oh, you're playing the next game, you're in the next sit and go, oh, how you doing? Became talking on Skype, and you know the way poker players make friends. And then, you know, eventually I think I decided I'd go out to America where she lived and go to New York, see some friends in New York, and then go down to Connecticut where she was from. And I was in my head, I was like, okay, well, if this isn't like, if she's not who I think she is, or if it's all a bit weird, I can always go back to New York. But the moment we met, we hit it off and actually started a relationship pretty much right out of the gate. And we were together until 2010. So that was like a 4 and a bit year relationship.
So interesting then that you met someone through poker. Do you think, how did that help or hinder, just being in a relationship, how did that help or hinder your progress in poker, do you think?
It was, and I would say completely a push, because she was a poker player. She actually played for a living as well for a decent amount of that time. So she understood the travails of what we do. And I think that worked. Actually, during that period, she sort of decided she didn't want to do it anymore. And she has opened a wonderful consignment store for children's clothes in Connecticut, and has expanded to a second store now. That became her baby. But she was a very good poker player at the time, and actually taught me a fair amount in the early days. She was as good, if not better than me, I know.
When you're in a relationship with someone who is doing the same profession as you, how I'm interested, like, where are the boundaries here in terms of work? Because I know, like Liza, in our relationship, I'm likely to be talking about work 90% of the time, and Liza has to say, Lee, we need some boundaries here. I don't want you talking about work all the time. Let's just talk about something else, because we're not having fun. There's no joy. There's no happiness, etc. Like with two poker players living together, how does that work?
It was fine. Like that relationship wasn't without its tumultuous times for sure, but I think it was kind of like side by side on the couches, to be honest. We were both just grinding 12 tables or whatever we were doing at the time. And we were very kind of 45-man, 90-man sit and go base. So you could kind of time the sessions. You kind of knew it would be over by X time, and you could kind of plan a bit of a social life around it. But you're right. Like we probably talked loads about poker. And actually now I'm with Sharon for 8 years now, and God love her, like she has to listen to so much poker chat when we're out poker chat, and she has kind of quite rightly drawn a line in the sand and said, look, we have to stop the poker talk. Like can some of the like, okay, or you need to get out of your system, do it now, but then like stop, and then we get to have a meal and, you know, whatever, and socialize. And she's absolutely right about that, because that's just completely unfair. She's not a poker player. She does work with us, actually. She's the animator and graphic artist behind all the more recent stuff that the Chip Race do. It used to be Willie Elliott, who's a phenom when it comes to his amazing Photoshop skills and his wonderful graphic work as well. But Willie took a full-time job with PokerStars about 1.5 years ago, and Sharon sort of took the baton off him and does great work for us now.
Yeah, does a good job,
but she would still not really know. She would still come in and go, "Where does the button go in this image?" And I'd have to
I can see that. And I guess as you get more successful and the chip race wins awards, and then you got the other one, I see that you had Dominic on as a guest the other day, and I like the little art piece on that. You are likely going to be talking about it more because you're going to be excited and enthusiastic, and it's like, what can you do? What can you do? So we talk a little bit about the inciting incident, and you're getting into it. Was there ever a moment where the refusal of the call came up, where resistance showed its ugly head and you kind of failed to beat it? So like you're kind of going with it, you're reaching for the stars, you're playing these sit and goes. But was there a time when you thought, I'm not going to make this?
There was a time where I didn't want to anymore. So there's a common motif coming out here, which is that the obstacle or the villain or the threat seems to be more internal than external. I think in a sense. I think around the 5th year I was playing poker, pretty much synchronized with breaking up with Michelle, moving back to Ireland, feeling a little bit like a fish out of water again, not quite knowing where my life was going. And sort of really wanting to maybe give another go to writing, and I did work. I took 6 months off to write with another fantastic writer. We put together a Bible for a really good show. Actually, that's actually a show I would still hang my hat on and say would be great if it got made. A show called Roll. We pitched that to a number of people. We pitched to RTE in Ireland. We pitched to Channel 4. There was some semblances of interest, but they didn't really, I don't think anyone really understood the piece. It was very buried in the world of poker. So, it was sort of reaping from what I now understood in a much greater sense from the world I'd been living in for several years. And my co-writer was he's a really beautiful writer. So I was like structurally very solid, and I kind of could piece the scenarios together, but he's got a bit more of a lyrical quality. And I think he kind of painted in the pictures, if you like. And I think that could have been a great show, but I sort of decided, I want to do that now. And I downswung really hard around that time. I broke up with Michelle. I was back in Ireland. I sort of thought, fuck poker. I don't want to do poker now for a while. And I got back on the right thing. And then that ended in not succeeding again. So it was like a second punch. And I thought, well, what am I going to do now? And actually, Darrow Carney's friendship is someone I had got to know during those months, and I was still dabbling with poker, even though I wasn't playing full time for a bit of that time. He was like, look, you're a very good poker player. You're one of the best in Ireland at the time. You should redouble down on that, focus on that. And we used to study together and go through hands and stuff. And he sort of reignited my passion for the game, I think. Sort of made me believe I could be a winner again. Or even that I wanted to be. I think he made me want to do well again. So that, a friendship and a partnership, because we've ended up collaborating on lots of things, has been formed in that time that sustains to this day. And I owe him a great debt. I suppose we talked about mentors and role models earlier. I definitely think he fits into the role model category. He's tenacious and he's determined and he's disciplined and he's hardworking, and being around people like that, it rubs off.
If you want to be the best, then it's not a bad strategy to learn from the best. And with people like Jason Kuhn and Phil Galfond over at Run It Once, their training site has your back. Sign up today and you will receive 2 new training videos on a daily basis and 3 elite videos, including one from the beast himself, Mr. Philip Galfond. The link you're looking for that is once.run/hero learn.
It's really interesting because, whenever I think of the refusal of the call, I'm always thinking Rocky and Mickey, or Luke Skywalker and Obi-Wan Kenobi. It's that. So we've got Dara in the role of Obi-Wan Kenobi, but you still got to make
that. Oh, he's going to love it. Yeah, okay.
So we still need more help than that, right? So if we think of the Lord of the Rings. And so, we got Gandalf, but then Gandalf's like, okay, so we need to put we need a fighter, we need a magician, we need all these things to help Frodo get to Mount Doom, right? So who are the people that were in kind of those positions for you in order for you to really kind of cement yourself as a professional poker player in the sense of longevity? So every professional poker player I interview very have a lot of pride about being in the game a long time. Like who's the supporting cast to Dara here?
It's definitely the sort of the group of people we built around us actually around that time. So Dara and I started staking. A lot of people, he staked Dara Davey initially, who then became one of the co-stakers. So it was very much the three of us. And then Jason Tompkins, another fantastic Irish poker player, became the fourth person in that sort of grouping. We called ourselves the firm, and we sort of created a sort of what we hoped was a very positive stable of poker players. But like, we never liked the word stable. That's why I was reluctant there, because at some level it always felt like, well, they're not horses, they're people who want to do well, and we don't really want to ride them for half their equity for long periods of time, because that's a kind of a trap for players to get stuck in. Like, none of us had ever been staked for any prolonged period before. You know, Dara had staked Dara for a little while, but that wasn't something we thought was necessarily good. You know, it's better to build your own bankroll up. It's better to, you know, be your own master at some level, or at least that was kind of a part of our personal ethos. So yes, obviously there are some players who are much more suited to being staked and sort of having some of the financial stuff kind of removed from their actual playing. I get that completely. And we staked some people like that for sure over the time. But there was a sort of an overarching theme within the ethos of what we did, which was that we wanted people to only really be staked for a year or maybe a year and a half, and then have enough to build out of that. We did a lot of coaching with everyone we staked. We wanted to sort of not just inform their games, but also inform the practice of being a poker pro. That's probably one of the things we're best at, is like, we're all good exponents of the game. Dara obviously is, but actually all the lads are particularly good. I was probably the weakest of all of them, but we were good pros, if that makes sense. And that's
totally.
That's more than half the battle, maybe. That's actually a really tough part of it, is actually like psychologically thinking of yourself like a small business that wants to grow to be a bigger business. And how do you kind of take those steps, and how do you do the risk management of that responsibly? And I think all of those guys, it was wonderful to see. Dara posted something recently. It was a blog he wrote from like 8 years ago, and everyone was featured in it. I was like, all but one of those people are still professional poker players today. Like, and that was all the guys we staked, all the guys we were attached with, and they're all there. Like, we've got a group chat that we talk most days, and everyone's still trying to help each other out. Everyone buys action off each other. We all swap and things. So they were definitely the backbone of that stuff. And very much, if you want to call, I think it's almost to diminish their role, but if you want to call them the supporting cast, I suppose you could do that. But no, very much intrinsic to that. But I think for me, actually, the personal journey became sort of one, because I do want to kind of orient this to the theme of your wonderful show, because you have this kind of Joseph Campbell thrust.
And nobody knows it better than you.
and the hero journey. Yeah, again, well, obviously it is you mentioned Obi-Wan Kenobi earlier. It was actually credited by George Lucas as his template.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
It fits perfectly. But I suppose for me, a big part of that was figuring out that I had to do both. That I could write a blog, and that would scratch the itch of a bit of creativity within the life of a poker player, but the itch remained. Segueing into this sort of more ambassadorial role, where I'm half poker player, half producer of a podcast, producer of a web show, or whatever you want to call it, and have these other strings to my bows where I get to kind of flex different muscles. Like, I get to write the script. I get to imagine how the interview is going to go. I kind of think about the game tree of where the guest might take us and work that out, and then sit down, and there's a performative aspect, you know, like we are doing now. You know, you're sitting here and you're kind of acting it out, and then you can edit afterwards. Well, in the case of the lock-in, not so much, but like in the case of...
Oh, yeah, Dave. No. There's no editing.
You don't do no editing from me. It all stays in. It all stays in.
Let me tell you what.
So much gets cut. So
let me tell you what that's about, right? That's me in 10 years looking back, going, man, you should have edited. I know that, right? I don't go there. Just a time thing or what? I don't know. I use excuses and go, oh, it has to be natural. It's all bullshit.
No, but that's very fair, because actually it's the most time consuming part.
Yeah.
The editing is at least equal to all the other elements combined for me with the chip race. So that on its own, if I didn't do it, like, I don't think the show would be as polished or as nice or as, you know, clear or whatever. Like, you know, again, trying to you very nicely said it was a very well polished show.
Well, no, it is,
and that was a very nice compliment because that's what I tried to do.
Yeah.
But like, if I didn't do that, we could probably make twice as many shows.
No, dude, I remember like I was in Venice, and I was just a live reporter, and they said to me, "Would you do this is when they just started live streaming the World Poker Tour? Would you do a segment like literally a couple of minutes just in the break, just giving people an update about what's going on?" And I'm like, "Well, I've never done this before," and it was live. So they give me the camera. So then I have to think about what I'm going to say very quickly and do it, right? And I did it. But that's always been my mentality. So like when I'm doing I Am High Stakes Poker, I have to do the intros. I don't like doing them, but I always need to do it. I just need to do it. Like I can't do it 2, 3, 4 times. Like it just fucking bothers me. It ends up being 15 times.
Well, can I just say that, well, one, if you don't watch I Am High Stakes Poker, I hope it's okay to plug your other thing on this thing.
Shall I pretend I'm plugging it?
That is a fucking amazing piece of content. And I don't think enough people in poker have actually seen it. And I try to tell people, if you haven't seen them, you have to see them because they are, I think, maybe pound for pound, the best insight into a tier of the world that we don't really have much access into. And I think you've done something really special with that show. So first of all, I can't say that enough. Secondly, I love your West Wing moving camera intros. I love how you even frame those.
But that's not me, right? Like
it's another string to your bow, though.
I'm the guy, though. I'm the guy who's getting ordered around by the production crew. So like the I Am High Stakes Poker is a good example of using teams in order to accentuate and make something that you do yourself even better, right? Like everybody else does that stuff. I want to tap in. Thanks for your love. I'll receive it. And I want to try something here. It might not work. It might flop.
And we know you're not going to cut it out now, so
I'm not going to cut it out.
If it's bad,
I'm not going to cut it out, so fuck it. Right. When I first got, I think you're a fucking amazing writer, by the way, right? Just want to put that out there. And when I first got into writing, not thinking I was a writer, not having no writing experience other than writing love letters, I had to think of a theme, of a story, because I knew in my head that if I just sold one piece, like how am I going to get the next piece bought? Like, but if I have a series, then if it works, they're going to need me to keep writing. So I created the Ogmore Poker Tour for Bluff. And what I would do is every Tuesday I would go play poker with my mates, and they were all my characters in this story. And I really, really wanted to turn it into a sitcom. Like if I give this to Ricky Gervais, like it's got every hallmarks of a sitcom. But where I struggled with was every time they'd say something fucking stupid, they'd look at me and go, "Oh, that's going in the magazine," and I would be there with my notepad. But when I stopped playing, I couldn't write. So what I'm getting at is the creativity for me needed a push. Like it wasn't just so like it didn't come for me. I couldn't lock myself in a room and think about these gags and these setups. I'm asking you, like in your writing and then transferring into poker, like how creative are you when it comes to writing? How creative are you when it comes to poker? Or are you just GTO following the rules? Like what are you the guy like you can't have a HUD and all of a sudden you can't think you can play poker? Or are you able to be creative? Did that work? Am I making any sense?
No, you are making sense. And I think probably as much as I've often tried to approximate more optimal lines, so like that certainly would have come across in becoming a good exponent earlier than most people at short stack play. That was certainly one of the major strings to my bows. I had to be a string to your bow as a sit and go player, and I followed it into other kind of game formats where that was important. Similarly, quite a mathematical component to a lot of the satellite strategy stuff, which again, Darren and I spent a lot of time on, talking about those kinds of hands. Obviously, he's the maestro, but I was certainly, I hope, at least some kind of Padawan as we kind of like worked through all that kind of stuff. It was very much a process of trying to figure out the right lines. But I suppose when it comes to like a bit more creativity, I suppose I was always looking for ways, particularly in the live arena, where you could move very far away from game theory. I always thought like online, you want to try and get as close to it as you can. and live, you want to actually move quite far away from it, because there's so much more ways to exploit people. And with the additional information of seeing them and kind of figuring out how much you could exploit them, flatting became a much bigger part of my game, where, you know, I'd be in a 3 better fold situation online. I'd be like, no, flat and just stare at the guy. And you can kind of then, you know, engage them and try and figure out creative ways to take their money. And I think that's where I would have been decent at that side of it. I don't think particularly great, but like decent at that side of it, good enough to do well and be a decent winner. But I think the creativity stuff, it's more like how I approach constructing an interview, or how I approach like thematically how an episode of the Chip Race will work, or something like that. For me, that's really important, because I want the audience to kind of have some sense that there's through lines, some sense that there's storylines being kind of played out across episodes, callbacks to different things, references to things that you're familiar with, advance preparing people for guests I know who are coming, who then get kind of hinted at in earlier episodes. Like I wanted to kind of feel like a journey of like a whole group of people, that the poker public or the poker community or whatever they are, and that you get a kind of a flavor of all these characters playing bigger parts and sometimes smaller parts and whatever it would be, and that somehow comes across in the show. That's for me is the endeavor. Now, whether we achieve it or not, I don't know. We might get close sometimes on a good day, but that's what we're hoping for, and that's what makes me really satisfied, is when I kind of feel like, oh, we did that one well, or that interview was particularly on point. And then I get a kind of a kick. My creative side gets a bit of a kick from that.
I think it's important in life to get that kick. That's like your own personal feedback. You know, I think that's perfectly healthy. You know.
Well, and can I just say, like, I love how you described yourself as a person who only wrote love letters before you started writing, because I think your style of writing, and again, I'm going to do a second plug. If you don't read your work, which I don't know people, but back in the Calvin Ayre days, now I know for what's your man's name who you're writing for at the moment? Foy, that's it. Sorry. Like that's the Triton stuff. For me, like, there's a dirty, gritty. We've often talked about the kind of the Kerouac or Bukowski qualities, but when you think about those guys, they're obviously beat writers, and they're obviously the sort of lounge lizard, down and out kind of points of view. So it's a mucky world they're portraying, and I think you've always trying to keep the sexy, gritty, mucky part of poker in there, which I think is very important. It should be there. It belongs there. But there's also, with all of those writers and with you, a romantic quality. There is a kind of a higher ideal, or there's, you know, maybe it's the romance of the one that got away, or it's the romance of the love and lost. But there is something in the ingredients there, which I think you capture better than anyone. I've always told you you're my favorite poker writer, and I know you're not everyone's cup of tea, and I know we could have a good joke about the people who are quite established in the industry who think you're a desperate writer, but they're fucking wrong. They don't get what you do. They don't get what you bring to the table, and that's a shame for them, because when you do get what you bring to the table, it's so enjoyable. Like I always look forward to a Lee Davey piece.
That actually, what you just said there, thank you. I received that compliment as well. It links back to you saying, you're going to take away my fucking TV show from me? Fuck you. No one's going to be in control of what I do. I'm going to be my own kind of master. It's almost like, how can I put this? This morning I was in the park with my daughter, and I'm sat on a bench, and she's eating a boiled egg, and I'm doing an Instagram story, and there's no one near me, and I got my mask down, and the security guard, who's fucking miles away, says, "Put your mask on." And I look around, I'm like, no, there's no one around me. And he's like, "Put your mask on. It's a rule." Right? So if someone slaps a rule in my face for rule's sake, I'm going to go into a room and go, fuck. Like, I want to rebel against that. So if someone tells me this is the way you should write because this is the way we were taught in school and this is what the book says, and you write differently, then I'm going to rebel against that, and I'm going to go even more the other way. I'm going to be more like, and it's my inner child. Like, it's like, okay, how can I wind them up even more? Like, and how can I put the word cunt in here? How can I fucking put wanker? Like, how far can I go to like just piss people off? It's so fucking childish, and I'm growing out of it now. So I'm proud of myself for growing out of it. But I don't like rules.
Now you're the slick guy in all the Triton videos, doing his walk-ons. It's yeah.
but this is applicable to poker as well, right? Like if it this is why I was talking about the creative piece. If it is just all about following rules, then where is the intrinsic value of actually playing the game, right? Like it just becomes money orientated, right? Which is then extrinsic, and how far does that motivate you? Do you know? It's a tough one.
Yeah, I think poker players definitely will always have a problem there where despite what you say, that there are ways in which you can express creativity in our industry, not just in the content creation, but even on the felt. I think you're right. Like it is a pure capitalist game. It's a pure game of trying to make money, and that's how it's judged. So we are always going to find it hard to find our value in that at some level. Like professionally, we can find our value, but as human beings, it's a little harder to find a lot of what you need to find to feel good about yourself in that.
For sure. Just want to switch it up a little bit, just touch on your all is lost moment. And you sent me a very poignant, beautiful blog post about a really tough period in your life. Talk about it a little bit if you don't mind, because it was I was like very emotional reading it, and I'm assuming that part of your life was one of your, if not your, all is lost moment.
Yeah, for sure. The time you're referring to is about 6 years ago until about 4 years ago. It was about a 2.5 year period where myself and my girlfriend were trying to have a baby. And unfortunately, we're having no success. Sharon showed superhuman resilience to keep trying as we did, but there were recurrent miscarriages, which were devastating to us. Some very early, some a little bit later, which were harder always. And but also just dealing with that sort of spectre of like, would we be parents? Would we actually get to be parents? Which is something we both so desperately wanted. And the piece you're referring to, I wrote. I guess I probably wrote it maybe 1.5 years ago now. We have a son, Hunter, who, with the help of a clinic in Prague, was born 3.5 years ago. So that worked out for us wonderfully. And we were actually very lucky not to be people who had to go to clinics over and over and over again, because even that part of that process, that's a whole new potential for devastation and sadness. But those couple of years where it wasn't going our way were very hard on the relationship, in danger of tearing us apart at times. I think when you have loss of that nature, well, one, you might be quite private about it, because it's like you don't tell people you're pregnant until you're 3 months pregnant, kind of nearly the rule. So a lot of the time nobody knew. You're dealing with that privately as a couple. You're also dealing with the fact that even people who do know, or maybe people that you can tell, or maybe ways in which you can express it, it's not understood in the same way. Like people would understand if you lost a child, and of course losing a child would be much worse, but they don't understand that it's at least approaching that, or there's something closer to that than the nothing that they can't really understand it as. So that was very hard, and you feel kind of alone, and you feel as a couple like it's you're grieving at different times, and you're grieving in different ways. And days where I might be trying to bury myself in work to just keep going and not dwell on it might be the day she's having her toughest days, and then I feel I seem really insensitive then in those days. And vice versa, Sharon might be really keen for us to try again. She was always incredibly strong at just wanting to just put herself on the line over and over again to try to have a family. Like it's what we wanted. And I was probably closer to saying, let's just take a break for 6 months. Let's just not keep in this. And, but she would want to drive us on. And then sometimes that might seem insensitive to me, because I'm just like, can I just be sad for a bit? And maybe we climb back on that horse in a few months. So that's just such a devastatingly tough time. Actually, after writing that piece, a lot of people reached out to me, which was wonderful. My girlfriend actually wrote a phenomenal blog of her own throughout the period of this, and still contributes to that blog, and still interacts with people who interact with that blog now. I think it's become a wonderful resource for women who have had recurrent miscarriages and are struggling in that way. Because I think it is hard for people to understand, your nearest and dearest, the people who love you the most, mightn't be able to understand. And then that feels hollow. Their counsel feels hollow at some level. So sometimes it might be a stranger on the internet, but being able to relate in a way that actually is tangible and is the same or close to the same as what you've gone through has been very powerful. So I know she's connected with lots of people through that. And as I said, loads of people contacted me after the blog, and you wouldn't be surprised that it actually does affect a lot more people, and people that would never reveal it to you, because it is one of those sad, quiet, private tragedies. I felt the need to express it, and I suppose that's how I did it that time. But that was a very tough period. It was almost like our lives were on pause for quite a while. And now not so much. Hunter's 3.5 and he's brilliant. So it's a happy ending for us. But one of the important parts of that story for me, and I hope it comes across at the very end, and I actually wanted to put in a sort of almost religious line, and I'm not religious, but a kind of but for the grace of God go I, that, we have Hunter. And I know a lot of people who've been through equal tragedy, more complications with recurrent visits to clinics to try to do in vitro and have a family another way, and have been equally unsuccessful at that too. And that's just so devastating. And that could have been us. We were really lucky as soon as we went to a clinic. That could have been us, the people who are childless now. And I don't know where our lives would be. So I do feel so lucky in the greater scheme of things, even though I feel like we were incredibly unlucky for a long time.
Yeah, gratitude, right? I mean, I tell you what I got out of it the most. I mean, I didn't know where it was going at first. Like when I read the first part of it, of you jacking off it
starts with a wanking joke for anybody who wants to check it out.
But the reason that really spoke to me is because I had my own similar experience when I got together with Liza. We were in our 40s, and we wanted to have a baby. So I needed to check that all my little tadpoles were okay. but I quit porn. So I find myself in this room, and they had these magazines of porn, right? So I was thinking about it when you were like starting out with that, and I was caught in this, like, what do I do? Like, I'm not allowed to look at these things, but how am I gonna get out of this room? Like, so that's why I said to you, your piece was like beautiful, but it was poignant, it was funny and everything. The thing that like sprang out at me definitely was the togetherness of you as a couple. So what I mean by that is I think it can be all too easy, I think, for the guy to write about this harrowing experience as being central to just your wife, right? So we're talking about earlier on about my friend Mark. At that time when he was looking after his wife and his child, nobody would have given a fuck about Mark. They would have just been looking after his wife, quite rightly, because she was really super struggling. But at the same time, he's caving in his insides. And what I came across to me was, wow, this is a joint experience, two very different experiences, but there are two people in here who had to grieve and grieve differently and had to support each other when they weren't probably capable of doing it to the best of their ability. And it really, I was like, wow, this is really brave writing, because I don't think a lot of people would have gone there, and I think would have felt uncomfortable to them. And it shows a real strength in your relationship. I mean, like, how does that massive thing going on in your life, how does that affect your poker game? Like, because you're trying to make a living. I can imagine it. Do you know a scenario popped up in my head? You're deep in a poker tournament with 100K for first. You're down to last 18, and suddenly your wife really fucking needs you right now. That's that type of game. It's not like you can just be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to go like it. Like how did it affect this game we're talking about?
Well, almost exactly what you said did happen actually. I wasn't into the last 18, but I was in a poker tournament, and I did get on the next plane home. I was in London, I remember. Look, it completely messes with your life. I don't want to be like bemoaning, oh, they were the years I did the worst. They probably were the years that I have done the worst as a poker player. But I also feel like, well, life wasn't about playing poker then. It had a different agenda. Yes, I was still trying to make a living. Yes, I was still trying to do stuff that was work-oriented and still to do with other ambitions, but very much our lives were on hold, waiting to be parents and trying to achieve that goal. So that was that was first and foremost. And yeah, look, I didn't study poker that year. I definitely played a lot less. But that's just obviously going to be the way it was. Like that, we were involved in something bigger than, the game of cards that particular time. And obviously at any one time, we hoped that the next time would work. So you don't really know that you don't know you're going to be in this kind of like 2.5 year mire when you're in it, and then when you get to the 2.5 year point, you're thinking, am I halfway through it, or like, do I give up at some point along this? It's a weird experience, and I don't think we ever gave ourselves time to grieve in between. So it ends up being a kind of a repressive kind of experience where you sort of have to go into denial just to keep going, and everything else has to fall by the wayside. And I think it was a dark time. I don't want to overstate that. I don't want to diminish it, but it was a tough time
and an important time in your life. And that's the reason that we're raising it. And I think it's really important, for people to be listening and understanding this, because it can help a lot of people. And like I just want to draw attention to the fact that you said, poker had to take a back seat. Like, obviously the words you were using were, well, of course it was going to take a back seat. I imagine there are a lot of men in the world who wouldn't have been able to do that. They would have been so afraid. They would have been a little bit clueless, scared, frightened, and probably would have just delved into the only thing they knew what to do, which was just like play the game. So, again, more credit to you for that. So what does a treasure look like now? Because you've got yourself in a spot where you've got Hunter, you settled in Malta, you've got a great relationship, you're playing poker, you're an ambassador for Unibet, you've got an award-winning podcast, you just ventured away from that into some other area. I mean, what are we back on? Where is the treasure here now? At one point, maybe it was the Oscars. Where is it now? Now you're a little bit older and more mature.
Maybe there is still kindlings of ambition to get into other kinds of writing and stuff. I'd be lying if I said they didn't exist. But also, young family now and very much in dad mode. I find these times so precious. I love spending time with Hunter. I see him every single day. If COVID wasn't here, I'm sure I'd be going off on some poker trips and see him a little less. So I've been given this gift at some level to, spend an awful lot of time with my son in a time period where I'm guessing a lot of dads aren't so lucky. A lot of dads have to go to work. A lot of mums have to go to work. To be able to work from home, to be able to spend as much time as I do get to spend with them is absolutely magic. I'll never get these years back. So I'm so happy to have that opportunity to be here with Sharon. We have a great life and a great setup, and that's not to say that there aren't still ambitions that are out there, and I'm sure we'll return to those at the appropriate time. But I suppose what am I proud of? I guess we touched on this earlier. It's the friends I've made over my life. I include Sharon very much as the centerpiece of that. I haven't shedded friends like is sometimes common as you get older through the years. And the fact that I've maintained all these friendships from different phases of my life is something that I find truly special, because it's people who really know me and know me from interesting times when I was a different person, even as a teenager or in my 20s or whatever it is. And I have great relationships with those people. And the fact that they consider me their friend makes me very proud. I think that's how I get my pride, to be honest.
Well, Dave, thank you for being our guest on the Hero's Journey. It's been a pleasure getting to know a little bit more about you. And thanks for all the love as well. Keep doing. Don't ever give up writing, because you're absolutely phenomenal at it. All right. And take care of yourself.
Lee, thank you so much. And I have to say, on behalf of the poker community, I'm going to speak for all of us right now. You are one of the greats, and I hope that your work continues to help as many people as I know it does. It certainly entertains, but I know it also counsels and looks after people and cares for people in a really important way. So please don't stop being that guy either.
Thank you, Dave.